the great part about doing this show is I get to talk to a whole lot of people, and people I've never met, people I know a little bit, and people I've known for thousands of years, like this gentleman we're about to be speaking with. His name, Joe Pankowski. His profession, he is a partner with the firm of Wofsy, Rosen, Kweskin, and Kuriansky in Stamford, Connecticut. His area of the law, tax, trust, and estates. But he's not going to talk about that tonight. He's going to talk about college football. Little background on Joe, a graduate of Florida State University, the University of Virginia School of Law, graduate tax in NYU, and a graduate of Yale Divinity School. And we're talking football with Joe. Joe, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Tony. Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure to be your friend, I think, since way back in 1993, if I'm not mistaken.
Some things are not fit for the airways, but yes, I agree with you. But yeah, it really has been quite a ride, and thank you very much. Talking about college football this year, a lot up, a lot down, a lot of so many things quickly moving. I mean, college football is almost moving at a pace that politics is. And strongest football conference that you might think. You know me, I've been a big Pac-12 guy for thousands of years. I'm not the college football fan that you are. Few people are. But what are your thoughts on that? SEC, ACC, Big Ten?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is for years, it's been a pretty common belief that the Southeastern Conference is the strongest football conference. You, of course, have Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee. In other words, you have all of these strong programs, but in recent years, if you look at it carefully, you would say, wait a minute, it looks like Alabama and the 11 Dwarfs. In other words, the SEC has not been that strong out of conference, including in the bowl season. Alabama is Alabama, but the SEC has been really on Alabama's coat strings. And as you saw in the national championship game last year, Clemson beat Alabama. So the question then becomes, top to bottom, which conference would you take? And quite frankly, as a Florida State grad, I'm biased, but I would take the ACC at this juncture. We have Clemson, the defending national champion, Florida State, which beat Michigan in the Orange Bowl. You keep going down the list. Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Miami, Pitt. These kinds of schools are strong top to bottom. You always have the Wake Forest of the world, but at the end of the day, if you had to match them up one-on-one, much like you do in the basketball ACC Big Ten challenge that ESPN did, if you actually did an SEC-ACC challenge, you would probably see Alabama win their game, but the rest of them might very well be taken by the ACC because of the fact that top to bottom, the ACC is a stronger conference. Similarly, go to other conferences, you look at the Big Ten, you say Michigan, Ohio State, maybe throw Penn State in there, but the rest of the conference is pretty weak. And your favorite conference out in the Pac, well, yeah, you've got USC, Oregon, but UCLA, but at the end of the day, from top to bottom, it's still not that strong. So top to bottom, right now, I would say the ACC is the strongest football conference. And, of course, we'll see some of that starting on Labor Day Saturday when Alabama opens as a 7-point favorite against Florida State. In the Georgia Dome, excuse me, not in the Georgia Dome, in the Mercedes Dome, the new Mercedes Dome in Atlanta.
Now, something here I'd like for you to, paint a picture for us as you do so well. Those people here in the East Coast in sports, we interviewed Bob Lazari and I interviewed Kirk Bavacqua the other night, who mentioned a couple of trades, baseball player with the San Diego Padres, and he had said, people in the East Coast don't get it. It's only Yankees and Red Sox and nothing else. Now, college football in other parts of the country, and I try to tell people, this is their Yankees. This is their Patriots. I mean, can you give us a feel of why college football is so big in places like South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida?
Yeah, I absolutely can. I think that people should consider college football in the South second only to Christianity and religious fervor. That is, people live and die for this stuff. You start out by getting into your RV, if you're a person of means, on a Wednesday. You drive to the stadium. You spend Thursday miserable day because your team lost the day before. Monday, you're still either celebrating or commiserating with your friends. Same with Tuesday. But by Wednesday, you're thinking about the following week's game. And yes, you will go to church on Sunday. Most people in the South are still Christians, Bible-believing folks. But they are thinking just as much about Nick Saban if they're a Bama fan as they are about Jesus.
You've characterized that so well. Thank you. The Alabama-Florida State opening game, ESPN has it a 59-41 in favor of Florida State. Nick Saban, renowned coach that he is. Deshaun Hand having a little difficulty with a drunken driving incident. Where does this go? How does it play out? And what would you predict for this game?
I would still take Bama. I mean, there are a couple of statistics that people should be aware of. And that is Nick Saban at Bama, 10-0 in season openers. Saban is also a perfect 10-0 against his former assistant coaches, who, of course, Jimbo Fisher is one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, most of the time, Alabama is playing a cupcake to start their season, so it's not quite Florida State. But still, Saban always seems to have his players completely ready. Florida State, meanwhile, as you'll recall, in their opening game against Ole Miss last year, got grilled. They were down at halftime big before they rallied to win that game. You drop behind 2 touchdowns on Alabama, the odds are you're not coming back. With that said, the beauty of this game is it really is almost a preseason game. And the reason for that is both teams, if they win out, easily make the Final Four. Alabama, even if it loses one more and wins the SEC, clearly is going to the Final Four. FSU is a more interesting question. Were FSU to lose to Clemson after losing to Alabama, or to Miami, or to Florida? Could a 2-loss ACC team, with one of those losses being to Bama, make the Final Four? The thought is yes, they would still get in. So the irony of this game is, as fun as it's going to be and as hyped as it's going to be, as far as the Final Four is concerned, it may not mean as much, because now these conference championship games and winning your conference is critical to making the Final Four, whereas in the past it was like you had to be in the Final 2. Now that you can be in the Final Four, you're in a position where you can lose an early season game, and FSU is getting a boatload of money, as is Bama, to play in this. They're opening the Mercedes Dome, getting fantastic publicity for recruiting, so it's a win-win for both programs, even if they lose.
It really is quite a world. And as far as, quote unquote, as we say in our business, follow the money, or dead presidents sometimes start to walk on 2 legs. Cash flow of college football. Is this, in your estimation, a big cash cow, or is it a big cash cow with only the bigger plants and the bigger schools?
It's going to be a really tough situation. As we've seen from conference realignment, these conferences are all been about getting a certain regional alignment, certain big teams. Why would, for example, would the SEC want Missouri? Well, they wanted Missouri because of the St. Louis TV market. Mm-hmm. Why did the Big Ten want Rutgers, the New York market? Okay, in other words, it's all about TV ratings and internet. And here's the big problem they're running into, though, now. ESPN's viewers are dropping.
Right.
Yes, because everybody now is streaming on the internet and not necessarily paying for cable. They're cutting the cord. So the real question is going to be in the 2020s, when these deals come off the books. ESPN's not going to be able to afford to make this kind of payments anymore. They simply don't have the money. Their corporate parent, Walt Disney, is not going to make this happen. So you're really looking at a really serious potential realignment of conferences like the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten and Big 12 and Pac-10 breaking away from the NCAA and forming their own league. Why? They don't want to share money with McNeese State. They don't want to share money with Florida A&M. They don't want to share money with all the other schools. So why should they? They're the ones generating the money. So to make a long story short, that is the fear, that someday you may see these large football programs, and I do mean football programs, notice I'm not referring to them as colleges, breaking away.
And you hit on a very important point there, and we can kind of dovetail in with the NCAA. You read a lot, you hear a lot about, college athletics governance in if you want to put that in quotation marks or not. And do you believe that these bigger plants and these bigger schools, in pulling away from the NCAA, will perhaps what's in the back of their mind is more money, less regulation, and we can go ahead and more or less not have some body looking over our shoulder? We can do what we want?
More or less, that's exactly right. You're already seeing that problem with Ole Miss. And then, of course, the whole Hugh Freeze situation relating to sanctions that are about to be handed down against Ole Miss. You also have the same problem at North Carolina with their academic scandal. Without the NCAA's huge fist over their heads, they could be more freewheeling. That's not the greatest thing for the athletes, by the way, because they're already in a position where the schools are trying to do everything they can to keep them eligible. If, in fact, the schools don't have to keep them eligible with the tutors and everything else, the athletes themselves might be hurt. So I'm not suggesting that the breakaway from the NCAA is a great thing. I'm simply saying if you follow the money, it doesn't look good for these smaller schools for the NCAA to keep sharing in these massive pools of money, just because of the fact that these big schools, because they're all getting used to these huge fees, right, every year.
Right.
You're seeing indoor practice facilities being constructed at Oregon, Clemson, Florida State, Florida, all of these power schools, Alabama, of course. They're used to these wonderful paydays each year now, and they're using it to fund their other athletic programs. That's the little understood thing about this. These football programs are making the women's sports and the smaller men's sports possible.
Yeah.
So, for example, BU is a small school. They couldn't afford college football anymore. Their team was, Division I AA, not bringing in a lot of money. In order to keep equity, to keep the women's programs going, they actually had to cut their college football team. So BU's college football team went away several years ago. Very sad, but a reality of the economics of the situation, that if you're not a program that's bringing in a lot of money to support your other programs, then you're in a big financial hole vis-a-vis all the other requirements to keep the genders equal in terms of college sports.
Now, do you foresee, with this breaking away of the bigger schools and quote-unquote NCAA, we don't want you as a partner anymore, that it's going to go to something like a pay-per-view kind of thing on the internet, or a pay-by-subscription, where it's you will pay a certain amount of money every year to see all your Florida State games without the interference of trying to figure out where it is on cable, and it'll probably be at a higher price?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. That there will be an outlook, much like the rest of the internet is going to be, and TV is going to emerge into that, where you're going to pay for what you want. So, for example, on my current cable system, I get the Food Network. Do I want the Food Network? No, I don't want the Food Network, but it comes as part of the package. That gets me ESPN,
right.
ESPNU, ESPN Classic, etc. But someday they're going to figure out, when the internet is completely ubiquitous, we're going to be in a situation where you're going to buy your own particular package, much like you do, by the way. We already see that right now with the NFL season ticket on DirecTV, on the Major League Baseball thing offered by your cable system. You can buy into getting the whole Major League package off your TV. That's what it's going to be like on the internet.
Right.
So I will buy the entire ACC package. I will buy the entire SEC package. I will buy the entire Pac-12 package. And I will pay money directly to some entity that is managing those 4 to 5 super
delivering you the content.
Bingo. Yeah. And that's how they're going to make their money. Now, I'm not psychic, okay? So as a result, this could not happen. But when you look at the revenue stream and how it's going to drop in the 2020s, when ESPN can't make these kind of rights payments, it is almost inevitable that you will see something happen where either the NCAA tells its smaller schools, sorry, you're getting a much smaller piece of the pie so we can keep a piece of this action, or they're just going to break away.
And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I was doing something work-wise in Bristol, and I drove by the ESPN plant, and it was just a sea of cars and a sea of towers, and it was mind-boggling to me. I never had reason to drive by there, and I'm just thinking, you're not going to need all of that.
Well, and you're already seeing that. Sadly, ESPN has let go of their more famous people. Danny Cannell, Florida State graduate, Florida State quarterback, to my mind, pretty darn good college football analyst, was let go, along with dozens of other people on air and off air, because Walt Disney is coming down. I shouldn't say Walt Disney, he's been dead. Disney.
Well, he's in a cryogenics, if you want to get technical about it, but anyway.
Disney is saying to ESPN, cut your costs. We're not going to keep floating this stuff. You guys have got to do something about this. And, of course, unfortunately, ESPN is cutting off their nose to spite their face, because these are the kind of people I'd actually tune in to watch. Like if I want to hear Danny Cannell mix it up with Paul Feinbaum, Danny Cannell being the anti-SEC guy, Paul Feinbaum being the SEC guy, that's fun to watch. But with Danny not there anymore, do I really want to tune in to watch Paul Feinbaum tell me for the upteenth time how great Alabama is? No. So it's a very interesting tightrope that ESPN is being forced to walk in order to try to remain somewhat profitable in an environment where they have way overpaid in rights fees to maintain all of these conferences, and have made promises they may not be able to fulfill. For example, ESPN runs the SEC network, which was the deal they made with the SEC. They have also promised the ACC that the ACC will get its own network. Will that actually happen? Stay tuned, as they say.
Now, you're right, and you said something earlier which, to me, bells went off in my head. College football programs, if you want to put that in quotation marks in capital letters, and the conclusion of the statement or the term is obvious, but I read a lot of opinions as to, give up the shit, make this thing professional already. These kids don't get anything. Their schools make millions. It's unfair. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely see, as a former sports editor at the Florida State College newspaper, the Flambeau, back in the 80s, you see how hard these athletes work in any sport, but especially in college football. College football, they are just being pushed to the nth degree. I'd argue college basketball is probably very similar. But at the same time, they are getting opportunities that they otherwise might not have. So, for example, let's assume, like most, by far, the vast majority of college athletes, you do not go on to a pro career, or if you have one, it's very short. You still have the opportunity, because of your name, to trade on that. You've got a bachelor's in science or a bachelor's in arts from a state university. You can go sell insurance. You can go sell cars. And so around these college towns, you will find former athletes doing those kinds of jobs. Why? Because they generate business. I'd love to buy, a car from Deion Sanders, right? I mean,
great.
The point is, there's something.
Have a picture with him.
Exactly, and so there is a component here, and I have this fight with my Ivy League educated attorneys all the time, which is, shouldn't Florida State shut down as a school and become just a football program? And the answer is no, because you're giving athletes an opportunity for an education that our current public school system may not give them in inner city Miami, or in Podunk, Florida, or Podunk, Alabama, or Georgia, where the public schools, due to white flight, thanks to Brown v. Board of Education, aren't exactly the greatest thing. So this opportunity to get remedial education, to become able to function in today's society, is a critical component of college education. With that said, do I think athletes should be paid? Absolutely. It's absolutely outrageous that these universities are making so much money on these kids between, jersey sales, etc., that in fact these kids don't get something. And especially many of them do come from impoverished backgrounds, which is why you see what is known in the SEC as bagmen. That is big-time boosters who walk around with bags of money, giving them to athletes, and that's one of the allegations against Ole Miss currently.
Right. And let's talk about that. I mean, I might look at that through my Eastern nose and say, well, that's, big-time college football, sniff, sniff, sniff. And it's, I don't even know where to begin. A coach with a cell phone and escort service. Walk us through this, please.
Sure. Ole Miss's coach, Hugh Freeze, basically a god in Mississippi. Why was he a god in Mississippi? He beat Alabama twice. That's just not done in Mississippi, okay? I mean, and so they were willing to look the other way because when Hugh Freeze came into that program, Ole Miss had all kinds of problems. Forgive your radio audience, but the notion in the SEC was not they were Ole Miss, but they were Ole Piss, okay? In other words, they were really, really, really bad, okay? Freeze comes in, turns them around. All of a sudden, they're getting amazing athletes, okay? You remember the movie The Blind Side?
I do.
Okay. Why did he go to Ole Miss? I don't know. You tell me. I mean, he had so many other opportunities, including, as you saw in the movie, Nick Saban. Why wouldn't Michael Oher have gone to Alabama? We'll never know the answer to that. But the bottom line is, studs like him, all of a sudden, were going to Ole Miss, all right, out of nowhere, okay? FSU was losing recruits to Ole Miss, and we're going, this just doesn't happen. What the hell is going on?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the big question now. How did Hugh Freeze do this? Now, Hugh Freeze has his own personal issues. He is a very religious man by all contexts, but as we all know, the flesh is weak. And in this case, he picked up the phone, a university phone, by the way, so not exactly the smartest thing to do in the world, and called a phone number well known for being an escort service. Was he calling for himself? Was he calling for his assistant coaches? Was he calling for players? It will come out at some point. And the most interesting thing about all of this is the only reason this came out was because of a litigation from a former
coach, yes,
Houston Nutt, who, because in discovery, was able to get all of this stuff and all of this dirt, and that forced Freeze's resignation. So what's sad for Ole Miss is they tasted glory. I mean, beating Alabama, being on the cusp of the SEC championship game, but in both cases, they didn't get there because the SEC West is a very, very difficult division. And although I would argue the ACC is the best conference in football right now, I'd say when you look at it from a division basis, the SEC West is the best division of a conference when you look at Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, LSU, Texas A&M, whereas the SEC East is completely weak. Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Missouri. I mean, these are schools that have no business, are just getting crushed. So every year you tune into the SEC championship game and you cry because Alabama's a 17-point favorite.
It's an amazing thing. And those schools, as you know, we had a mutual friend that passed on recently, and I was there taking care of things. And my eyes were bugging out at the size of the South Carolina football stadium, which I've seen some huge stadiums. This had to be the biggest, and the program is
Correct. And Bryce Stadium is an amazing facility, and the bottom line is South Carolina fans will support their team come hell or high water. And they now have Will Muschamp, former Gator coach, now at South Carolina, hoping to turn it around. The nice thing for teams in the SEC East, they all have a chance to go to the SEC championship game. That is, that side of the conference is so weak, you could roll the dice this year and say it could be Georgia, Tennessee, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina. Who knows? It could be any of those schools. Whereas in the SEC West, we know for a fact Ole Miss has no prayer of getting in. Texas A&M has no prayer of getting in. The only teams that realistically have a shot at this are Alabama, Auburn, and LSU. Okay, so you can take that to the bank. One of those three schools will be in it. Whereas if any of those SEC East schools I just talked about, they'd all be in the also-rans. So I can almost guarantee you that the winner of the SEC will be Alabama, LSU, or Auburn. And so one of those three teams is almost guaranteed, maybe even two someday, but one of those teams is guaranteed to being in the Final Four.
I would have to agree with you. In our closing moments together, wishing we had more, the whole concussion issue, will that weigh on college football?
Absolutely. Eventually, the personal injury lawyers are going to bring it down, not just from the NFL, but down to college football, okay? And that will eventually cause some major ramifications in college football, meaning that you will see rule changes in both the NFL, college football, down to high school, peewee level. Don't be surprised to see, instead of what we have right now, which is targeting as an ejection, any use of the helmet is an ejection. Don't be surprised to see a return to 100 years ago of leather helmets. Okay? In other words, they've got to take the head out of the game. And as long as the head is in the game, football is going to be in a death spiral because parents aren't going to let their kids play football.
And it's which leads to other things when you're unprotected, and it might lead to other injuries. But it's certainly not the last of it, that's for sure. Well, anyway, Joe, believe it or not, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being with us and educating us all on college football, and I certainly appreciate it, and I know the crowd does as well.
Well, Tony, it's been a pleasure to be on your show. I'd love to come back next year and talk about some more college football with you.
And we'll have a lot of stories to tell, God granting us days. Thank you, my friend.
Have a great day, Tony.
Thank you.
Nice talk with your audience as well.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. And that was Joe Pankowski, and we're going to be coming right back. Just put the phone down so I don't get any feedback, with some of the most amazing baseball bloopers that you're going to see. And these things will have you laughing. This is Major League Baseball. Right back after this.